Clerk will re-report, I guess, the floor amendment.
Mr. Speaker. I can't do it.
Can't do it.
Mr. Speaker, the amendments before the body now are the group of amendments offered by separate and different set of amendments offered by Delegate Toscano. They're the ones that begin at line 409 and total 63 in all.
Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Charlottesville, Delegate Toscano.
I'd like to withdraw those amendments.
Okay, Delegate Toscano withdraws those amendments. Delegate from Manassas, Delegate Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking to the bill.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've heard quite a bit about the green energy investments that are going to be in this bill. The number has changed considerably throughout the course of the last month. It started off as 500 megawatts, then it went up to 2,000, then 4,000, now 5,000. But, Mr. Speaker, I would like to remind the ladies and gentlemen of this body that under current law, the SCC authorizes new capital investment based on basically what's cheapest. That's what's been holding up green energy investment in the Commonwealth of Virginia for quite a while. Green energy up until this point has not been the cheapest option. But, Mr. Speaker, over the last 2 years or so, the price of green energy has dropped like a stone. It's gone down 30% in the last 2 years, and it's continuing to fall. And I have some information here from a federal agency, the Energy Information Agency, that has the total cost of energy for a megawatt from various sources. And on average, Mr. Speaker, the cheapest fossil fuel generation facility would be an advanced combined cycle natural gas-fired power plant, and that comes out to $56.50 per megawatt of energy generated. But when you look at onshore wind, the cost for that has come down so far that it's now $52.20. So, Mr. Speaker, under current law, we're going to get this green energy investment anyway. So I would like to remind the members of this body that changing the law to create investment in green energy to get through the SEC is not necessarily needed. There are green energy projects that will pass the RIM test now. We're in a different world than we were 2 years ago. So, Mr. Speaker, having said that, I would encourage the members of this body to reject engrossment and defeat this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Salem, Delegate Habeeb.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the bill.
Delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, members of the body, I voted against the bill in subcommittee. The bill is introduced. While I very much appreciated what the chairman and Delegate Bagby and others were trying to do, it just wasn't there. There were too many significant problems with the bill at this point. And when I voted against the bill, I outlined a series of issues that I had with the bill, and I presented those to all the various stakeholders. Again, this is not just the Dominion bill. This is a bill that affects everybody, all of our utilities, all of our ratepayers, everybody in the Commonwealth. By the time that bill got to full committee, they had addressed essentially all of the issues I raised to the point that I and others who had concerns in Commerce and Labor were able to vote for it. And frankly, I really appreciate Delegate Toscano continuing to try to work on some of the hanging issues. But because I voted against the original version and then was able to vote for the version after the amendment, some people have asked me to explain what changed to understand how the bill's improved. So, Mr. Speaker, if I may, just very briefly, a few things that have improved in this bill as it has gone, understanding there is room for improvement still. Number one, the amount of refunds for quote-unquote overpayments have increased dramatically. We are hundreds of millions of dollars that are going to be refunded to our ratepayers. It expedites the payment of the taxes, the tax benefits as a result of the federal tax bill. Without this bill, those payments would be refunded in 2020 or 2021 through the rate review process. Now they get done immediately. Of course, it lifts the rate freeze. Here's one really super technical issue. Under current law, if a utility earns above what's called the collar only 70% of that gets returned to ratepayers, 30% gets kept by the utility. We changed that from the original bill to now, and that number is now 100% of that money gets reinvested. That can be many millions of extra dollars. Instead of going to Dominion shareholders, will go to our ratepayers in the form of investments in the grid. We also beefed up the SCC review. They get to address rates in the very first triennial review now. Of course, APCO is already out of the rate freeze. They're coming up in 2020. Their review will cover 17, 18, and 19. That's a change that they get to do it in the very first time. This RAC issue, these rate adjustment clauses that Chairman Kilgore mentioned, this is actually a really big deal. Those are the things that cause your constituents' utility bills to jump up and down wildly when they get this big new investment through the form of a RAC. This bill now smooths those payments out, and your constituents won't see those major jumps. And then a couple of other things that have gotten less attention, although Chairman Kilgore mentioned them. Chairman Marshall was a leader on these issues. The economic development and the rural broadband are major new components of this bill that are really a big deal, especially for those of us who represent rural territories. Now, we continue to have questions like, is the SCC review robust enough? Is the double dipping issue addressed? That's why, while a lot of us don't necessarily want to do it on the fly, we appreciate the work that the minority leader is doing. So the point of what I'm saying is there are reasons to not think this bill is perfect. Just like when we vote on the budget in a few weeks, there's going to be reasons not to think it's perfect. But it's a very complicated bill that transforms the way we do investment in our grid in Virginia. This will truly set our grid up for the next several decades. And the bill is not the bill that was introduced. The bill has gotten much, much, much better. It probably got better on the floor today. Again, this language is tricky, but it probably got better. So what I would encourage everybody to do is recognize the bill is much better. It is better than the status quo. If you vote against this bill, then you are saying you don't want to return hundreds of millions of dollars in overpayments. You don't want to expedite the return of the tax payments that we're going to get quicker. You don't want to invest in the grid. You don't want the rural broadband. You don't want the economic development. It's better than the status quo. I hope we'll vote for this bill and then continue to rely on the stakeholders to improve the bill so that when we see it on final passage, it'll be better than it is today.
The delegate from Prince William, Delegate Roem.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak to the bill.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in the 13th District, which include Haymarket and Gainesville, have overwhelmingly, by a 10-to-1 margin, asked me to oppose this bill today. And I want to share some stories from out in that area in particular. And here's the thing, no matter, where we stand on this particular issue, especially regard to the transmission line, I know we want to do the best thing for our constituents in Western Prince William County. That goes for Delegate Hugo, that goes for myself, and everyone else here. I know we want to do the best, and even if we don't agree on it, at least we can agree that we're trying to do the best for our constituents. In this regard, in 2006, Dominion proposed 155-foot high power towers to go along the I-66 corridor that were to connect over to the Arcola substation in southern Loudoun County. Now, the residents of Western Prince William County at the time, particularly in Haymarket and Gainesville, protested against those lines until they were later moved down to Vint Hill Road, up the Prince William County Parkway, out into Cat Harpin, and out into Loudoun County. Now, fast forward a few years, and in 2014, this proposal came up. Now, the whole point of this proposal is to connect this roughly 6-mile transmission line, about 5 mile or so transmission line, out to a data center over in Haymarket, and that's owned by Amazon. The issue with this is that as of this moment, since the point that the SEC has reopened the case here regarding this issue, Amazon has yet to prove adequate need for this transmission line according to the SEC. As of this moment, right now, they have not proven adequate need for this. That's why in our community in Western Prince William County, no one wants 110-foot high power towers, myself included. And I can't imagine there's anyone within the Prince William delegation who would support having 110-foot high above-ground power towers going along the 66 corridor, let alone going through Somerset or Carver Road or Madison or anywhere else in this community. That said, while a lot of folks back home, have certainly talked about the hybrid route in this, and which is part of this, there's a few issues in terms of the actual wording of the legislation in regard to the hybrid route. And this is where I want to go with this. The first part of this, approval of a proposed transmission line for inclusion in this program shall not preclude the placing of existing or future overhead facilities in the same area or corridor by other transmission projects. Given that we have existing precedent for Dominion wanting to go along the I-66 corridor, back in the 2006 case as well as this case, what this basically says that even if the lines were to be buried along the 66 corridor, they could come back with another project to be built above ground through that corridor. That would clearly be a problem for the people of Western Prince William County who have rejected this on 2 occasions. The next part with this, the bill also states, the State Corporation Commission shall approve such underground construction within 30 days of receipt of the written request of the public utility to participate in the pilot program pursuant to this section. What is not included in there is any compulsory language or any mandate requiring Dominion to participate in the pilot program. What that basically means here is that this pilot program is opt-in for Dominion. And so when I talked to Dominion officials about this over the weekend, first this bill came out of subcommittee on Thursday night. So Friday afternoon, I met with 2 Dominion officials in my office for about 2 hours, and we talked about this. And then by this weekend, when I had a more thorough conversation with them, as well as talked to my constituents out west, they told me a few things. Number one is that there is no guarantee where the end route will actually go. We don't know what the SCC will actually rule in terms of where the routing will go, and that came from the Dominion officials themselves to me. They told me they do not know where this route will go in terms of its final trajectory here. The second part on this is that even while they don't know where that's going to go, what we do know is that the only place along the 66 corridor where you're going to have unanimous support within the area is through the existing median between the eastbound and the westbound lanes along I-66. That is owned by VDOT right now. However, Dominion told me that they need 40 feet of VDOT right-of-way along with 10 additional feet of right-of-way, so about 50 total feet, either to the north side of 66 or to the south side of 66, which would go right by our residential areas. And I spent Sunday going through pricker bushes and getting stabbed by thorns while walking with my constituents with a tape measure, measuring out 50 feet from the sound wall. And basically what we found along Jordan Lane in particular is that for one of my constituents, his name is Brian Riley, that his kid's swing set in the back is a soccer ball tap away from where the edge of that right-of-way would go. For those reasons, and the fact that my constituents have asked me over and over and over again to oppose this, I'm going to vote against this today, and at the same time, I hope to work with all stakeholders here so that we can come up with the best bill possible that takes care of our folks back home, and as well as takes care of our folks across the Commonwealth. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Delegate from Powhatan, Delegate Ware.
I'm going to disappoint you. I'm going to speak to the bill.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Back in 2015, we had a bill to adopt what was labeled a rate freeze. And I asked the question in committee, could not the State Corporation Commission, with its accountants, its engineers, decide what was a fair amount and what could be done? And the answer was yes, they can do that. That is what they are constituted to do. And the question that's really before us today in the form of this measure, a 62-page with 23 reenactment clauses. I'm sure you've all read this over the weekend, have digested it, and know exactly what each of those clauses means. But in case you have not, let me just remind us of some things at the 30,000-foot level or beyond, and begin with this question. How should a monopoly utility be regulated? There is a provision in the Code of Virginia for a group called the State Corporation Commission. They're almost a fourth branch of government, and there's a reason why 100 years ago we put them in place. and we enabled them and gave them the capacity to look at utilities and deal with and decide rate cases. They have that capacity. And historically, the General Assembly has said what the strike zone is, and we've let the State Corporation Commission call balls and strikes. What we're doing, what we're fixing to do, is to change the strike zone almost to get rid of the strike zone. It's going to be very difficult for the State Corporation Commission to do what it needs to do. And I really asked the question, will it be the regulated that becomes the regulator? I hope we will not engross this bill.
Thank you. From Fairfax, Delegate Keam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaking against the bill.
Doggett has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I wasn't planning on speaking either because I assume that a lot of folks here have already made up their minds. And for those who haven't made up their minds, I think I know which way you're all leaning because of the fact that you just accepted that floor amendment that would try to improve the bill. But I wanted to speak to follow up from the gentleman from Powhatan because he and I share a lot in common, including the fact that we think alike on some of these issues. And I want to pick up on his point and just point out a couple of facts here for us to consider here. And I can certainly respect and understand and appreciate those that want to support the bill. Because frankly, at this stage, I think the easy vote is a yes. You have the governor who personally negotiated a lot of good provisions. He had a lot of green energy. He had a lot of efficiency language. You have a lot of groups that normally would align themselves on this side of the aisle in favor, LCV and others, who are enthusiastic with what they've been promised in this bill. So I think for many of us on this side of the aisle, the easy vote would be a yes. For many of my friends on the other side of the aisle, the easy vote would be a yes as well, because the chairman put in a lot of time and effort. And I know many of his members, including my good friends who I serve with on Commerce and Labor, have done a lot of work to make sure this bill is as good as it can possibly be to not only help Dominion and APCO, but also to help our ratepayers have some certainty. And so I commend everybody for doing this. But my concerns, ladies and gentlemen, the reason why I voted against this in the subcommittee, and turned out I happen to be the only member of my side of the aisle that voted against this, and I'm going to plan on voting against this again tonight or tomorrow, is a little bit different than just the substance of what's in the bill, what's not in the bill, what's good and what's not good. For me, it's a fundamental question of what is the role of us as legislators in this environment when we've been asked to regulate an industry that affects all of our lives. And we made a decision a long time ago, just like the gentleman from Powhatan just mentioned, that we made a compact that says, since electric utility is such a difficult thing for the private sector to offer on its own, we, the government, will help you by giving you a license, giving you a monopoly, giving you the chance to serve everybody, and that we will guarantee your profit in exchange. All we ask is that you follow some rules. All we ask is that you have transparency. All we ask is that when you come before us, you tell us what's going on. Our government bureaucrats who know this stuff will be able to test you and ask you, and then we move on a yearly basis so that the rates you charge your customers every day will be the fairest rate possible. That is what the public interest standard said. And that was the deal we had until 1999. When the rest of the nation said, you know what, the energy industry is becoming more and more commercialized. There's more free market happening. And so a lot of folks who thought, let's give that a try, moved away from the idea of government-regulated monopoly into a private sector. So we tried competition for 8 years. We tried to encourage other companies to come in and say, hey, compete with Dominion, compete with APCO, compete with our electric co-ops, and give us better electricity. Give us more green energy. Give us more renewables. Give us a chance to have better energy for cheaper for our consumers. And ladies and gentlemen of the House, that did not work. After 8 years of trying the deregulated model, the free market model, it didn't work. All of you in this room who were here in 2007, I wasn't here, but all of you in this room voted to bring us back into the model of a regulated monopoly in 2007. You voted to re-regulate this industry because the free market did not work for that purpose. So at that point, the deal was, starting in 2007, a couple of years after that when the rate reviews kick in, that we will defer back to the State Corporation Commission, the expert agencies, on how they will review the rates of APCO and Dominion. And ladies and gentlemen of the House, I've only been here since 2010, but since 2007, and at least since the time I've been here, I have not seen a single time in the last 8 years when this General Assembly let the SEC do its job just as we told them to do it. We told them in 2007, this is your job. And yet year after year after year, we have bills that come up here that take that right away from them. They take that power and authority away from them. That we deem that our knowledge and our expertise trumps the knowledge and expertise of the bureaucrats and the lawyers that we've hired to do this job. So year after year after year, we've said, here are all the tools, but we're just going to deem that you're not going to be able to exercise this. We will replace our judgment instead. 2013, I remember distinctly. I came to this House. I was still fairly new. I didn't know how things were going, and I was told that there was an emergency. We had all these storm cleanup. It was going to cost a lot of money, millions and millions of dollars for Dominion and APCO, so we need to give them an emergency clause. Let's give them a chance to recoup that cost. I said, that sounds reasonable. Let's do it. So we voted for that. 2014, they came back and said, we're building another a nuclear power plant, North Anna 3. We're needing billions of dollars up front, and we need you to give us an exemption. So I voted for that. 2015, they came and said, you know what? Obama administration is doing something really bad for us, the Clean Power Plan. That's going to affect our industry for so long. We need you to exempt us from regulation once again. 2013, 2014, 2015. By the third time I said, you know what, I'm starting to feel like Charlie Brown and the Lucy. Every time I trust you, instead of giving us the refunds back, you've taken that money, $300, $400 million, and added it to your costs. As a result, the taxpayers didn't get their money back, and that became part of their over earnings that wasn't returned, but it was investment instead. So 2015, I said, no, I'm not going to vote for this. And here we are 3 years later. They want us to trust them once again and give us a way to exempt the SEC out of the process. Instead of a 2-year review, now it's 3 years. Instead of $400 million that should have been returned in 2013 and another $300 million in 2014 and however much we had in 2015, we're now told, trust us and we'll return all your money in 6 years after 2 triennial reviews are done. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, for me, this isn't so much about what's in the bill, and there are a lot of good things in it, but it's for me about what is our role as legislators. Are we going to concede over the last 10 years that we are the experts here, that we will replace our judgment with the judgment of the SEC officials? Not that I agree with the SEC 100%, but are we going to do that? Or are we going to go forward and let the regulators regulate the industry that we said should be re-regulated? That's the reason I'm going to vote no, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this plays out, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Delegate from Caroline, Delegate Orrock.
Mr. Speaker, I move the pending question.
Delegate Orrock moves the pending question. All those in favor of moving the pending question signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. The pending question is moved. Shall the bill be engrossed and passed to third reading? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. The bill is engrossed and passed to third reading.